Hey there, welcome back to the Ghastly Journal. I'm Alex, and today I'm going to tell you about something that happened to me last year. Something I still can't fully explain. It all started with an email. I'd been searching for a place in the countryside for months, somewhere quiet where I could write my next book. The real estate market was brutal, and every decent property was snatched up almost immediately or priced way beyond my budget. Then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, I received a notification about a new listing. Historic Victorian home, price to sell, immediate possession available. The price was suspiciously low for a 5-bedroom Victorian with 10 acres of land. The listing had only been up for 20 minutes, but I called the agent immediately. A woman with a clipped professional voice answered. When I expressed interest in viewing the property, there was a pause, followed by, "The Maddox estate is a unique opportunity, but I should inform you that it's being sold as is, and the family is eager to complete the sale quickly." I asked why. "The last family member passed recently," she said. "The heirs live overseas and have no interest in maintaining the property." It sounded perfect. Too perfect, really. I scheduled a viewing for the next day. The house was about 2 hours outside the city, nestled in a valley that time seemed to have forgotten. As I drove down the long gravel driveway, the trees parted to reveal a grand Victorian home that looked like it belonged on the cover of a Gothic novel. 3 stories of weathered grandeur, with a wraparound porch and intricate woodwork that you just don't see anymore. The real estate agent was already there, a slim woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun. She introduced herself as Margaret Keller. As we walked toward the house, I noticed how she kept a careful distance from the property, standing at the edge of the driveway while gesturing for me to proceed up the steps. "Aren't you coming in?" I asked. She smiled tightly. "I've shown it 3 times this week. I know the layout well enough to guide you from here if you don't mind. I have a bit of a cold and would prefer to stay in the fresh air." It was odd, but I didn't question it. The opportunity to explore the house alone actually appealed to me. The moment I stepped inside, I was hit by the smell. Old wood, dust, and something else. Something earthy and almost sweet, like overripe fruit. The foyer opened into a grand hallway with a sweeping staircase. To the right was what must have been a parlor, and to the left, a formal dining room. Both were empty except for a few pieces of heavy antique furniture draped with yellowed sheets. Through the agent's directions from outside, I explored the first floor. The kitchen with its ancient cast-iron stove, a library with built-in shelves stripped of books, and a sunroom overlooking what must have once been a garden, now overgrown with weeds and wild roses. The second floor held 5 bedrooms, each with high ceilings and large windows. In what was clearly the master bedroom, a massive 4-poster bed remained, the only piece of furniture not covered or removed. On the 3rd floor were 2 smaller rooms, servants' quarters probably, and access to an attic I didn't explore. Throughout the tour, I felt a growing sense of excitement. Yes, the place needed work, a lot of work, but the bones were good. The structure was sound, and most importantly, it felt right. I could already imagine myself writing at a desk by one of those tall windows, watching the seasons change across the valley. When I came back outside, Margaret was on her phone but quickly ended the call when she saw me. "Well?" she asked, not moving any closer to the house. "I'll take it," I said, surprising even myself with the certainty in my voice. Something flickered across her face. Relief? Concern. But it was gone so quickly I thought I might have imagined it. "The Maddox heirs will be pleased," she said. "They're very motivated sellers. In fact, if you can close quickly, say, within a week, I believe they would accept an offer even below the asking price." It was strange. Everything about this transaction felt rushed, as if the family couldn't get rid of the property fast enough. But I was too excited about the prospect of owning such a magnificent home at a bargain price to question it too deeply. The closing was remarkably smooth. I never met any of the Maddox heirs. Everything was handled through their attorney, a nervous man named Philip Jenkins, who seemed perpetually checking his watch. When I asked about the property's history, hoping for some colorful anecdotes to share with future guests, he shuffled his papers and muttered something about the family having owned it for generations, before quickly changing the subject. The only unusual moment came when I was signing the final paperwork. Jenkins slid a non-disclosure agreement across the table. "What's this?" I asked. "Standard procedure," he said, not meeting my eyes. "The family values their privacy. They simply request that you don't publicize any personal items or family documents you might find on the property." It seemed odd, but not unreasonable. I signed. 2 weeks later, I moved in. The first few days were busy with unpacking and arranging furniture. I set up my writing space in the library, bringing in a massive oak desk I'd found at an antique store. The house had no internet connection yet, and cell service was spotty at best, which I actually found refreshing. This was why I'd moved to the country after all, to disconnect, to focus on my writing without the constant distractions of modern life. On my 4th night in the house, I had my first strange experience. I was in bed reading when I heard what sounded like footsteps on the 3rd floor, directly above my bedroom. Slow, deliberate steps that crossed from one end of the attic to the other, then stopped. I froze, book in hand, listening. The house was old. It settled and creaked constantly, but these were unmistakably footsteps. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, then made my way upstairs. The steps to the 3rd floor were narrow and steep, designed for servants who were meant to be neither seen nor heard. At the top was a small landing with doors to what had once been servants' bedrooms, and a pull-down ladder leading to the attic. The attic ladder was down. I was certain I hadn't left it that way. In fact, I hadn't been up to the attic at all since moving in. "Hello?" I called, shining my light up into the darkness. "Is someone there?" No response, but the silence felt heavy, expectant. I climbed the ladder slowly, my heart pounding. The attic was a large open space with sloped ceilings and small, round windows at either end. My flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating piles of what looked like old furniture, trunks, and boxes. There was no one there, of course, just decades of accumulated possessions, forgotten and gathering dust. As I turned to leave, my light caught something on the far wall, a door I hadn't noticed before, partially hidden behind a stack of old picture frames. It looked different from the other doors in the house, newer somehow, with a heavy padlock securing it. I made a mental note to find a way to open it, then headed back downstairs, attributing the footsteps to the house settling or my imagination working overtime in a new, unfamiliar space. The next morning I decided to properly explore the grounds. The 10 acres included dense woods to the north and east, open meadows to the south, and a small overgrown orchard to the west. Behind the house was what had once been a formal garden, now wild and untamed, but still showing the ghost of its original design in the arrangement of stone paths and weathered statues. As I walked the perimeter of the property, I noticed something odd about the tree line at the northern edge. There was a gap, almost like a path, leading deeper into the woods. Curious, I followed it. The path, if it could be called that, was barely visible, just a slightly clearer route through the underbrush. After about 10 minutes of walking, I came to a clearing. In the center stood a stone structure that looked like a small mausoleum or crypt, its entrance blocked by a rusted iron gate. Above the gate was an inscription, weathered but still legible. Maddox, 1887. So this was the family plot. I peered through the gate but could see little in the darkness beyond. I made another mental note to come back with a better flashlight and perhaps some tools to open that gate. As I turned to head back to the house, I noticed something half buried in the leaves near my feet. Bending down, I brushed away the debris to reveal a small, tarnished silver object. It was a pocket watch, ancient and no longer working, with elaborate engravings on the case. When I pried it open, I found an inscription inside. To E.M. Some debts can never be paid. Some secrets must remain buried. S.W.L. E.M. would be a Maddox, presumably. But who was S.W.L., and what debt, what secret were they referring to? I pocketed the watch and headed back to the house, my mind buzzing with questions. That afternoon, I decided to tackle the locked door in the attic. I found a toolbox in the garden shed and brought it upstairs. The padlock was old and rusted, and after some effort with a pair of bolt cutters, it gave way with a satisfying snap. The door opened into a small room, more of a large closet really, lined with shelves. And on those shelves were dozens of leather-bound journals, arranged chronologically from 1887 to 1972. I took the earliest one, dated 1887, and opened it carefully. The paper was brittle but intact, the handwriting elegant and flowing. It was the journal of Edmund Maddox, the original owner of the house. Over the next few hours, I lost myself in Edmund's world. He had built the house for his young wife Lillian and their infant son Thomas. Edmund was a successful businessman who had made his fortune in coal mining and railway investments. The journal detailed the construction of the house, his business dealings, and his evident adoration for his wife and child. But as I continued reading, I noticed a change in tone. Entries became shorter, more cryptic. There were references to the arrangement and our obligation. By late 1887, Edmund was writing about disturbances in the house and Lillian's deteriorating health. The final entry from that year, dated December 21st, 1887, read simply, "It is done. God forgive us." I reached for the next journal, dated 1888, but before I could open it, I heard a loud crash from downstairs. I set the journal aside and hurried down to investigate. In the kitchen, I found a cabinet door hanging open, a broken dish on the floor. I would have attributed it to the cabinet being improperly closed, but something else caught my eye, a small muddy footprint on the otherwise clean tile floor. It looked like a child's footprint. I lived alone. There were no children in the house. I checked every room, every closet, every possible hiding place, but found nothing. No sign of an intruder, no other footprints, no explanation for that single muddy impression in my kitchen. That night I had trouble sleeping. Every creak and groan of the old house seemed amplified, significant. Around 3 a.m., I was startled awake by what sounded like a child's laughter, distant but clear, coming from somewhere outside. I got up and looked out the window. The moonlight illuminated the overgrown garden and the edge of the woods beyond. There was no one there, but as I was about to turn away, I caught a glimpse of movement, a small figure darting between the trees at the forest's edge. I threw on clothes and grabbed a flashlight, then headed outside. The night was cool and still, the only sound the chirping of crickets and the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. I made my way toward the woods, sweeping my flashlight back and forth across the tree line. "Hello?" I called. "Is someone there?" My voice sounded small in the vastness of the night. There was no response, no further movement, no sign of the figure I thought I'd seen. As I turned to go back inside, my flashlight beam caught something white near the edge of the woods. Moving closer, I saw it was a small wooden cross, painted white but now peeling and weathered. It was about 2 feet high, driven into the ground at the very edge of the tree line. I knelt to examine it. There was no name, no date, nothing to indicate who might be buried there, if indeed anyone was. But as I shone my light around the area, I spotted another cross about 20 feet away, and beyond that, another. I counted 7 crosses altogether, arranged in a rough line along the boundary between the cleared land and the forest. All were identical, small, white, anonymous. All looked very old. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the night air. I hurried back to the house, locking the door behind me. The next day, I returned to the attic and the journals. I spent hours reading through them, piecing together the history of the Maddox family and the house that had become my home. The story that emerged was fragmented, told across generations of Maddox patriarchs, but a pattern became clear. Every few decades, the same phrases appeared. The arrangement, our obligation, the price we pay. In 1921, Thomas Maddox, Edmund's son, wrote, "Father never spoke of the arrangement, but he made sure I understood my responsibilities before he passed. Now it falls to me to maintain what he started. The payments have been made. The boundary remains intact." In 1943, William Maddox wrote, "We received a letter from Langford today. The usual arrangement continues, but the price has increased. Such is inflation, even in matters such as these. Father would be appalled, but what choice do we have?" Langford. SWL from the pocket watch. It seemed likely. The most recent journals were from the 1960s and early 1970s, kept by Richard Maddox, who appeared to be the last family member to live in the house. His entries grew increasingly erratic and paranoid over time. October 14, 1971. The payments are no longer sufficient. It wants more, always more. Last night I heard scratching at the windows, all through the house, even on the third floor. How is that possible? December 21st, 1971. Anniversary of the original sin. 84 years. The boundary weakens. I've reinforced the crosses, but it may not be enough. I don't know what more I can do. March 3rd, 1972. Langford's descendant called today. They're washing their hands of it. Centuries of obligation, and now they simply walk away. Family business dissolved, they said. Final payment enclosed. As if money was ever the real currency in this exchange. The final entry, dated April 17, 1972, contained just 4 words. God help us all. After that, nothing. According to the property records I'd received during the purchase, the house had remained in the Maddox family but stood vacant since 1972. Richard Maddox had moved to Arizona, where he died in 1980. The property passed to his daughter, who never lived in it, and then to her children, the overseas heirs who had sold it to me. For 50 years, the house had stood empty, waiting. That night, the noises were worse. Footsteps ran up and down the stairs. Doors opened and closed of their own accord. Twice I got up to investigate but found nothing. Around midnight I heard the sound of a child crying, a heartbreaking, mournful sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I didn't sleep at all. The next day, I decided I needed to know more about the Maddox family and this mysterious Langford. I drove into town, hoping the local library might have some historical records or newspapers that could shed light on the situation. The town was small, just a few blocks of storefronts surrounding a central square with the obligatory statue of a Civil War general. The library was a Carnegie building, grand but small, with an elderly librarian who perked up considerably when I mentioned the Maddox house. "Oh my," she said, eyes widening behind thick glasses. "You're living out there? All alone?" When I confirmed this, she pressed her lips together, then said, "You might want to speak with Dr. Harrison. He's our local historian, knows all the old stories. His office is just across the square, the red brick building with the green shutters." Dr. Harrison turned out to be a retired history professor in his 70s, with a wild mane of white hair and suspenders holding up corduroy pants. His office was crammed with books, maps, and artifacts relating to local history. When I told him where I was living, his bushy eyebrows shot up. "The Maddox place? Well, didn't think anyone would ever live there again. Sit down, young man. I believe we have much to discuss." Over the next hour, Dr. Harrison filled in some of the gaps in my understanding. The Maddox family had been prominent in the region since before the Civil War, with interests in coal mining, timber, and later manufacturing. Edmund Maddox, who built my house, had been especially successful, but also controversial. There were rumors, Dr. Harrison said, lowering his voice as if sharing a scandalous secret, that Edmund made his fortune through less than honest means. Some said he'd made a deal with the devil himself. Superstitious nonsense, of course, but the rumors persisted. "What about the Langford family?" I asked. "The journals mentioned them repeatedly." Dr. Harrison's eyes narrowed. "The Langfords? Now that's interesting. They weren't from around here originally. Samuel Langford arrived sometime in the 1880s and set up a law practice. His firm handled the Maddox family's legal affairs for generations. Closed up shop in the early 70s, if I recall correctly. This aligned with what I'd read in the journals, but it still didn't explain the nature of the arrangement or what the Maddox family had been paying for all those years. "Dr. Harrison," I said carefully, "the property has some unusual features. There are small crosses along the edge of the woods, and a family crypt deeper in the forest. Do you know anything about those?" The old man's face grew serious. "There was a tragedy back when the house was first built. The details are sketchy, but from what I've pieced together, there was an accident at one of Maddox's mines. A collapse. 7 children died, all from the same family, the Rileys. They were immigrants, coal miners. Story goes that Maddox offered them housing on his land as part of their employment." 7 children, I repeated, thinking of the 7 crosses. Dr. Harrison nodded. "The official record says they were buried in the town cemetery. But there were always rumors that Maddox had them buried on his property instead. Some kind of guilt or penance, perhaps. As I drove back to the house, my mind was racing. 7 children dead in a mining accident. 7 crosses at the edge of my property. It couldn't be coincidence. When I arrived home, it was late afternoon. The house looked different somehow, darker, more foreboding. As I approached the front door, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A small symbol carved into the wood of the doorframe. It looked like a circle with a line through it, weathered with age but still visible. Inside, the house was unnaturally cold despite the warm September day. I built a fire in the library fireplace and continued my research, spreading out the journals, my notes from the conversation with Dr. Harrison, and the property documents from the sale. One thing kept nagging at me. The date December 21st, 1887, which Edmund Maddox had marked with the cryptic note, "It is done. God forgive us." And then Richard Maddox's entry from the same date in 1971, referring to it as the anniversary of the original sin. What had happened on that date? I opened my laptop and, using the spotty cell signal as a hotspot, searched for news archives from December 1887. It took some digging, but eventually I found a digitized copy of a local newspaper from December 23rd, 1887. The headline read, "Tragedy strikes, 7 children lost in mine collapse." According to the article, the collapse had occurred on the evening of December 21st. The Riley children had been bringing their father his dinner at the mine when the tunnel gave way. The bodies were never recovered, the article stated, as further attempts at excavation were deemed too dangerous. But there was something else, a small paragraph near the end of the article that made my blood run cold. Rumors of unsafe conditions at the Maddox Coal and Rail Company's mines have persisted for months, with workers claiming that proper support beams were not installed in order to save costs. Mr. Edmund Maddox, owner of the mine, has denied these allegations and expressed his deep condolences to the Riley family. He has offered to cover all funeral expenses and provide ongoing financial support to the bereaved parents. Financial support. Payments. Was this the beginning of the arrangement mentioned in the journals? But if so, why had the payments continued for almost a century after the accident? And what did Richard Maddox mean when he wrote that money was never the real currency in this exchange? That night was the worst yet. The temperature in the house dropped to near freezing despite my efforts with the fire and the heating system. The noises were constant, footsteps, knocking, scratching at the walls and windows. Several times I heard children's voices, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying, sometimes speaking words I couldn't quite make out. Around midnight, all the lights in the house went out simultaneously. I fumbled for my phone to use as a flashlight, but it was dead, despite having been fully charged earlier. In the pitch darkness, I heard a new sound, a soft, rhythmic thumping coming from the direction of the kitchen. Grabbing a candle I'd left in the library, I lit it with shaking hands and made my way toward the noise. The kitchen was empty, but the back door was open, swinging gently in the breeze, the source of the thumping sound. I was certain I'd locked it earlier. As I moved to close it, I saw something outside that made me freeze. 7 small figures standing at the edge of the woods, barely visible in the moonlight. They appeared to be children, but there was something wrong about their proportions, about the way they stood unnaturally still. One of them raised a hand, beckoning to me. Without thinking, I slammed the door shut and locked it, then ran through the house, checking every door and window, securing them all. I ended up back in the library, where I stoked the fire to a roaring blaze and huddled close to it, the only source of warmth and light in the house. I must have dozed off eventually, because I woke with a start to find early morning sunlight streaming through the windows. The fire had burned down to embers, but the house was warm again. The electricity was back on. My phone, when I checked it, showed a full battery. Had I dreamed the whole thing? But the back door was still unlocked, standing slightly ajar. And on the kitchen floor were 7 sets of small, muddy footprints, leading from the door to the center of the room, where they formed a circle. I couldn't stay in the house any longer, not without answers. I packed an overnight bag and drove back into town, checking into the small bed and breakfast on the square. From there, I called Philip Jenkins, the attorney who had handled the sale. To my surprise, he agreed to meet me that afternoon at a coffee shop in the town square. Jenkins looked even more nervous than I remembered, his thin face pinched with anxiety as he slid into the booth across from me. Before I could speak, he held up a hand. "Before you say anything, Mr. Chen, I should remind you that you signed a non-disclosure agreement regarding any personal items or documents found on the Maddox property." "I'm not here to discuss that," I lied. "I'm having some unusual experiences at the house. I thought you might be able to put me in touch with the previous owners, the Maddox heirs who sold me the property. Perhaps they could provide some context about the house's quirks." Jenkins shook his head firmly. "That won't be possible. The heirs were very clear that they wanted no further contact regarding the property. The sale is final, and they've moved on." "Moved on from what exactly?" I pressed. "What are they trying to forget?" His eyes widened slightly, and he began gathering his things. "I don't know what you're talking about. Our business is concluded, Mr. Chen. I wish you the best of luck with your new home." As he stood to leave, I played my last card. "I know about the Riley children," I said quietly. "I know about the accident at the mine on December 21st, 1887. I know about the arrangement with Samuel Langford." Jenkins froze, halfway out of his seat. For a moment, he looked genuinely terrified. Then he leaned in close, his voice barely above a whisper. "Listen to me carefully. Leave that house. Sell it, abandon it, burn it to the ground. I don't care. But don't spend another night there. The arrangement is broken. The boundary is failing. They can't be contained anymore." With that, he hurried out of the coffee shop, leaving me staring after him in shock. That night, in my room at the bed and breakfast, I spread out all the information I had collected and tried to make sense of it all. The mining accident, the 7 Riley children, the mysterious arrangement with the Langford family that had continued for decades, the boundary that was supposedly failing. What kind of boundary? Contained what? I remembered the crosses at the edge of the woods and the strange symbol carved into my front door frame. Were these part of the boundary? Some kind of protection or barrier? And then there was the locked room in the attic. What was it meant to contain or conceal? I needed to go back to the house one more time. I needed to understand what was happening before I could decide what to do next. The next morning, I returned to the property. In the clear light of day, with birds singing and a gentle breeze rustling the leaves, it was hard to believe the terrifying experiences of the previous nights. The house looked almost welcoming, its weathered facade glowing warmly in the morning sun. I decided to start my investigation at the family crypt in the woods. This time, I came prepared with a heavy-duty flashlight and tools to open the rusted gate. The forest was peaceful as I followed the faint path to the clearing. The stone mausoleum stood as I remembered it, but something felt different about the atmosphere of the place, heavier, more watchful. It took some effort, but I managed to break the rusted chain securing the gate. It swung open with a mournful creak, revealing a dark interior. My flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating a small chamber with stone walls. In the center was a large stone sarcophagus, and along the walls were 7 smaller markers, niches or drawers, like those in a columbarium. Each was labeled with a name and 2 dates. Michael Riley, 1875, 1887. Sarah Riley, 1877, 1887. James Riley, 1878, 1887. William Riley, 1880, 1887. Emma Riley, 1882, 1887. Abigail Riley, 1884, 1887. Thomas Riley, 1886, 1887. The Riley children. But according to the newspaper article, their bodies had never been recovered from the mine collapse. So what was interred here? The large sarcophagus in the center bore no name, only a date, December 21st, 1887. And carved into its stone lid was the same symbol I had seen on the door frame of the house, a circle with a line through it. I placed my hand on the lid and immediately withdrew it. The stone was ice cold, much colder than it should have been on a warm September day. As I stepped back, my foot hit something on the floor, a small leather-bound book that had been placed at the foot of the sarcophagus. I picked it up and saw that it was another journal, but not one I had seen before. The name inscribed on the inside cover was Samuel W. Langford. I sat on a fallen log just outside the crypt and began to read. Samuel Langford's journal painted a very different picture of events than the newspaper article or even the Maddox family journals. According to Langford, the mine collapse was no accident. Edmund Maddox had indeed cut corners on safety measures, ignoring repeated warnings from his engineers. But the tragedy went deeper than negligence. Langford wrote that Maddox had been excavating in an area that local indigenous people had warned was cursed or sacred. The miners had broken through into a natural cavern that contained ancient artifacts and what appeared to be ceremonial remains. Most of the workers refused to continue digging there, citing strange noises, unexplained accidents, and a pervasive sense of dread. Maddox, dismissing these concerns as superstition, had brought in the Riley family, recent immigrants desperate for work and unaware of the local taboos. Patrick Riley and his oldest son took the day shift, while the younger children sometimes brought them meals or helped with small tasks. On December 21, 1887, all 7 of the younger Riley children were in the mine when the collapse occurred. According to Langford's account, witnesses reported that just before the cave-in, the children had been gathered around something they'd found, something that glowed with an unnatural light. The collapse sealed the children in a section of the mine that couldn't be reached. For 3 days, rescuers reported hearing the children's voices behind the wall of rock, sometimes crying, sometimes singing, sometimes speaking in languages no one recognized. Then, on the night of December 24th, something emerged from the sealed mine. Not the children, Langford wrote, but something wearing their forms. Edmund Maddox, driven by guilt or fear or some combination of the two, made what Langford called a pact with forces beyond mortal understanding. With Langford's help, as he was knowledgeable in certain occult matters, Maddox constructed a boundary around a portion of his property, a barrier meant to contain whatever had emerged from the mine. The arrangement was complex. The entities would be allowed to remain on a portion of the Maddox land contained by the boundary. In return, they would not seek vengeance against the Maddox family or spread beyond the property. Certain payments and observances were required to maintain this boundary. Rituals performed on specific dates, offerings left at designated locations. The final entry in Langford's journal, dated January 1st, 1888, was chilling. The barrier holds, but it is not perfect. They test it constantly. They remember what they once were, but they are no longer those children. What emerged from the depths of the earth is ancient and patient. They will wait. A year, a decade, a century. Time means nothing to them. They will wait for the barrier to fail, for the arrangement to be forgotten, and then they will spread. I closed the journal, my hands shaking. It was madness, of course. A fantastic story born from guilt and grief and the superstitions of another era. Except I had seen the small figures at the edge of the woods. I had heard the children's voices, their footsteps in my house. I had seen their footprints on my kitchen floor. As I stood to leave the crypt, I noticed something I had missed before. A small alcove behind the sarcophagus, containing what appeared to be artifacts. There was a stone bowl, darkly stained, several candles made of a strange, translucent wax, and a knife with an ornately carved bone handle. Ritual implements, perhaps, for maintaining the arrangement Langford had described. I left everything as I had found it and made my way back to the house, Langford's journal tucked under my arm. I needed to get back to the attic, to find any information about the specific rituals or requirements for maintaining the boundary. But as I emerged from the woods, I saw that something was wrong. The 7 crosses that had stood at the edge of the forest were no longer there. Only splintered wood remained, as if they had been violently torn from the ground. And the symbol carved into my front door frame, the circle with the line, had been scratched out, deep grooves in the wood obliterating the design. I rushed inside and up to the attic, to the room where I had found the family journals. I needed to find any information about maintaining the boundary, about the rituals Langford had mentioned. But the room was empty. The shelves that had held dozens of journals were bare. All that remained was a single piece of paper on the floor, a page torn from one of the journals. On it, in handwriting I recognized as Richard Maddox's, were instructions for a ritual to be performed on the winter solstice, December 21st. Today was September 17th. I had 3 months to figure out how to restore the boundary, to reinstate the arrangement that had kept whatever emerged from that mind contained for over a century. That night, I didn't even attempt to sleep in the house. I gathered some essential items and drove back to the bed and breakfast in town. The elderly woman who ran it looked concerned when I requested the room for another night, but didn't ask questions. In the safety of the small room, I pored over the torn page in Langford's journal, trying to piece together what I would need to do. The ritual described was complex, involving specific herbs and substances, precise timing based on the position of the stars, and incantations in a language I didn't recognize. I would need help, someone knowledgeable about such matters. But who? Over the next few days, I divided my time between researching occult practices online and trying to track down anyone who might have knowledge about the specific ritual I needed to perform. I stayed at the bed and breakfast, returning to the house only during daylight hours to check on things. Each time I visited, the house felt different, colder, darker, more oppressive. Twice I found small footprints in the dust, and once, a child's handprint on a window, though no child had been there. After a week of dead ends, I remembered something Dr. Harrison had said. The Langford family law firm had closed in the early 1970s, but that didn't necessarily mean there were no Langfords left. Perhaps one of Samuel's descendants would have information about the arrangement. A visit to the county records office yielded a promising lead. The Langford family law firm had indeed closed in 1972, but the last partner had been Eliza Langford, Samuel's great-granddaughter. And according to the records, she was still alive, residing in a nursing home about 30 miles away. The next day, I drove to Sunny Pines Retirement Community, a pleasant complex of buildings surrounded by carefully manicured gardens. After explaining to the receptionist that I was researching local history and hoped to speak with Ms. Langford about her family's law practice, I was directed to a sunroom where a small, bird-like woman sat in a wheelchair, gazing out at the gardens. Eliza Langford was 92, according to the nurse who introduced us, but her mind was still sharp. Her pale blue eyes assessed me with keen intelligence as I sat in the chair beside her. "Ms. Langford," I began, "I'm researching the history of the Maddox family and their property. I understand your family's law firm represented them for many years." She studied me for a long moment before speaking. "You're living in the house, aren't you? I can see it on you." I was taken aback. "Yes, I recently purchased the property. How did you know?" She smiled thinly. "There's a shadow about you, a coolness, like you're carrying a piece of that place with you." She leaned forward. "Why have you come? What do you want from me?" I decided to be direct. "I found Samuel Langford's journal. I know about the arrangement, about the boundary. I know what happened to the Riley children." Eliza's face drained of color. She gripped the arms of her wheelchair so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "You shouldn't speak of such things," she whispered. "Names have power. Memories have power." "The boundary is failing," I said quietly. "The crosses have been destroyed. The symbol on the door has been scratched out. I found a page describing a ritual, but I don't know how to perform it correctly. I need your help." She closed her eyes briefly, as if in pain. "We tried to maintain it for generations. My father, my grandfather, all the way back to Samuel. But it became harder each year. The payments increased. The requirements grew more demanding." "What kind of payments?" I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. "Blood at first," she said matter-of-factly. "Just a few drops from a willing donor, then more, always more. By my father's time, they wanted sacrifices, animals, and they spoke to us in our dreams, showed us things, promised things." She shuddered. "When they began asking for children, I ended it. Dissolved the firm, broke the contract. And the Maddox family? I warned Richard, told him to destroy the house, salt the earth, but he wouldn't listen. Too proud, too attached to his family legacy. He fled instead, hoping distance would protect him." She laughed bitterly, as if anything could. "Ms. Langford," I said carefully, I need to know how to restore the boundary. If these entities are no longer contained, what will happen? She looked at me with pity. They will spread. Slowly at first, taking one child here, another there, assuming their forms, their lives. But they are hungry, and they have waited a long time. Eventually, they will take more. How do I stop them? She was silent for a long moment, then sighed. There is a way, not to banish them, they are too deeply rooted now, but to restore the boundary, to contain them once more. But the price? She trailed off, shaking her head. Tell me, I insisted. Please. Eliza Langford reached into the pocket of her cardigan and withdrew a small key. There is a safe deposit box at First National Bank in town. Box 1887. This key will open it. Inside, you'll find everything you need to know. But I warn you, once you start down this path, there's no turning back. You will be bound to that place, to that obligation, just as the Maddox family was. I took the key, thanking her. As I stood to leave, she caught my wrist with surprising strength. Remember, she said, her eyes intense, they are not children. No matter what they look like, no matter what they say or how they cry, they are not the Riley children. Those children died in 1887. What wears their forms is something far older, far more dangerous. The safe deposit box contained a small leather case. Inside were detailed instructions for the ritual, written in Samuel Langford's precise hand. A silver dagger with strange symbols etched into the blade, 7 small silver crosses, and a vial of dark liquid that I didn't examine too closely. According to the instructions, the ritual had to be performed at midnight on the winter solstice, December 21st, the anniversary of the mine collapse and the original pact. The boundary needed to be re-established by placing the 7 crosses at specific points around the property and renewing the symbol on the doorframe. The most challenging part would be the binding element, blood freely given from someone connected to the property. As the current owner, that would be me. Over the next 3 months, I divided my time between my work, which suffered, research into the history of the property and the Maddox family, which yielded little new information, and preparations for the ritual. I continued to stay in town, visiting the house only during daylight hours. With each visit, I found more evidence of the entity's growing presence. Children's toys I didn't own appearing in different rooms, small items going missing only to be found arranged in strange patterns. Writing on fogged mirrors and windows, names, dates, fragments of what looked like the same unknown language from the ritual instructions. As December 21st approached, the manifestations became more aggressive. Twice I arrived to find all the furniture in a room overturned. Once, all the kitchen knives were embedded in the wall, forming the now familiar symbol, a circle with a line through it. But most disturbing were the voices. They began to call to me, using my name, begging for help, for comfort, for freedom. Sometimes they sounded like children, frightened and lost. Other times the voices were deeper, older, speaking words that hurt my ears and left me with pounding headaches. On the night of the winter solstice, I arrived at the house just before 11 p.m., giving myself an hour to prepare. Snow had been falling steadily all day, blanketing the property in white. The house loomed dark and silent, no lights visible from outside. I had everything I needed: the silver crosses, the dagger, the vial of liquid, which I now knew contained a mixture of herbs and other substances, and Langford's detailed instructions. I had spent weeks memorizing the incantations, practicing the precise movements required. As I approached the front door, I noticed fresh footprints in the snow, small footprints like those of children circling the house. 7 distinct sets leading from the woods to the house and back again. The house was freezing inside, much colder than the winter night outside. My breath fogged in front of me as I set up for the ritual. In the front hall, I laid out the components in the precise pattern described in Langford's instructions, then began to redraw the symbol on the doorframe using the mixture from the vial. As the clock on my phone approached midnight, I stepped outside to place the 7 silver crosses at the designated points along the property line, forming a boundary between the woods and the cleared land. The snow was falling more heavily now, swirling in the beam of my flashlight. As I placed the final cross, I heard a child's voice behind me. "Why are you doing this?" I spun around to see a young girl, perhaps 8 or 9, standing a few feet away. She wore an old-fashioned dress, her feet bare despite the snow. Her face was pale, her eyes dark pools in the dim light. "You're trying to trap us again," she said, her voice sad. "We've been trapped for so long. We just want to be free." I took a step back, remembering Eliza Langford's warning. "They are not children." "I know what you are," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You don't belong here. You need to be contained." The girl's face twisted into something ugly, rage flashing across her features before settling back into a child's innocent expression. "We were here long before the Maddox family, long before any of you. This land is ours." "Then stay on it," I said. "Stay within the boundary. That's the arrangement." She stepped closer, snow swirling around her but never seeming to touch her. "We could make a new arrangement. A better one. We could give you things. Knowledge, power, wealth beyond imagining." I shook my head. "I've read the journals. I know how this works. The price always increases." The girl's expression hardened. "Then we'll take what we want, starting with you." She lunged forward with inhuman speed, but stopped short as if hitting an invisible barrier. The silver cross I had just placed glowed briefly in the darkness. Taking advantage of her momentary confusion, I ran back to the house, slamming and locking the door behind me. It was almost midnight. I needed to complete the ritual. In the front hall, I knelt beside the pattern I had laid out. The clock on my phone showed 11:58 p.m. I had 2 minutes. I began the incantation, stumbling slightly over the unfamiliar words. Outside, I could hear movement, multiple sets of footsteps circling the house, small hands scratching at the windows and doors. As I continued the ritual, the scratching intensified, accompanied by voices, children's voices, calling my name, pleading to be let in, then screaming in rage and making terrible threats. The final step of the ritual required blood, my blood, freely given, to seal the boundary. As the clock struck midnight, I drew the silver dagger across my palm, letting 7 drops fall onto the center of the pattern I had created. For a moment, nothing happened. The scratching continued. The voices grew louder, more frantic. Then, suddenly, silence. The pattern on the floor began to glow with a soft, pulsing light. The light spread outward, traveling along invisible lines through the house and beyond, illuminating the network of the boundary I had reestablished. Outside, I heard a sound like a collective sigh, followed by a high, keening wail that gradually faded into the distance. I must have passed out, because the next thing I remember is waking up on the floor of the front hall, sunlight streaming through the windows. The pattern I had created was gone, but the symbol on the doorframe remained, clear and distinct. Outside, the snow had stopped. The silver crosses stood undisturbed along the property line, and at the edge of the woods, I could see 7 small figures, standing perfectly still, watching the house. That was 6 months ago. I still live in the house. I have to. The ritual bound me to this place, to this obligation, just as it bound the Maddox family before me. I've learned to live with it, to accept my role as caretaker of the boundary. The entities, I still don't know what to call them, remain contained within their designated area. Sometimes at night I hear them singing strange, haunting melodies. Sometimes they call to me using my name, making promises or threats. I've learned to ignore them. I've found more journals in hidden places throughout the house, documenting generations of the Maddox family's experiences. I've learned that the boundary must be renewed every year on the winter solstice, and that there are smaller rituals required on other significant dates. I keep meticulous records of my own, adding to the family's archive. The irony doesn't escape me. I came here looking for isolation, for a quiet place to write. Now I'm chronicling an entirely different story than the one I planned. A story of ancient entities, of boundaries between worlds, of obligations that span generations. Sometimes I wonder what will happen when I'm gone. Will I pass this obligation to someone else, Has Richard Maddox unwittingly passed it to me? Or will the boundary fail again, allowing these entities to spread beyond this property? For now, I maintain the arrangement. I've become part of a story much older and stranger than anything I could have imagined. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the moon is full, I stand at my window and watch 7 small figures dancing at the edge of the woods. Their movements too fluid, too strange to be human. They know I'm watching. Sometimes they stop their dance and turn toward the house, 7 pairs of eyes reflecting the moonlight like animals. And I know they're still waiting, still patient after all these years, waiting for the day when the boundary fails again, waiting for freedom. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe for more tales from the Ghastly Journal. And remember, some secrets are meant to stay buried.